I'm Tracy Sable. Tonight on EWTN News Nightly, pro-lifer in court. New developments in the Philadelphia trial of Mark Houck, a Catholic father of 7. Classified documents mishandled. Hear the growing outrage from lawmakers on Capitol Hill. And Vatican Secretary of State Cardinal Pietro Parolin provides a one-on-one interview about an event at Lourdes, global diplomacy, and the war in Ukraine. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us. Our top story tonight, it is day 4 of the Philadelphia trial for Mark Houck, the pro-life father of 7 who is facing federal charges. In an emotional day of testimony, both Houck and his teenage son took the stand. The 14-year-old son said that he was approached by a Planned Parenthood clinic volunteer and verbally abused. The volunteer testified yesterday. He said nothing to Houck nor his son. Also yesterday, attorneys for the pro-life father filed a motion to dismiss the federal charges against him. However, the motion was denied. If convicted, Houck faces 11 years in prison. The House investigation into President Biden's handling of classified documents is picking up speed. A top official from the National Archives has agreed to sit down for a transcribed interview next week with the House Oversight Committee. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales has this report.
Gary Stern, the Archives General Counsel, has agreed to meet with the committee next week on Tuesday. It marks the first interview in the committee's investigation. The archives currently have the classified documents found in President Biden's home and former office.
The Republicans are going to ask questions and try to determine answers for the American people, try to do things that a lot of the mainstream media has failed to do.
The archives missed a January 24th deadline by the committee to turn over the documents. Oversight Committee Chair James Comer and others vow to keep pressing the Biden administration for answers on how documents got to unsecured locations.
Perhaps we should have made it a proper example of Hillary Clinton when she had classified documents in her possession, and we wouldn't be here right now with everyone and their mother having classified documents.
Oversight Committee member Lauren Boebert plans to ask specific questions next week.
I want to know what these classified documents are. I want to know what they are pertaining to, what's in them, why they were taken, when they were taken, and why it's taken so long to find out that they were in Joe Biden's possession.
On Wednesday, the National Intelligence Director met with members of the Senate Intelligence Committee in a classified setting and refused to answer any questions about the Biden and Trump investigations. Senator John Kennedy tells me Intelligence Committee members should have access to all documents.
We have intelligence committees comprised of people who are adults, and they don't leak. And they're entitled to know what these documents are all about, who saw them, how they got to go there. This is just, it looks to me like, objectively, it's just been a massive cover-up.
Meanwhile, House Republicans passed a bill limiting President Biden from tapping into the Strategic Petroleum Reserve unless more federal lands are available to produce oil. The move is designed to lower gas prices. The Senate is unlikely to take up the measure. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
President Joe Biden is calling for peaceful protests as the city of Memphis, Tennessee, and the nation brace for the release of a police video. It reportedly depicts 5 officers viciously beating a black man who later died. The officers, who are also black, are charged in his killing. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, President Biden says the family of 29-year-old Tyre Nichols, the man who died, deserves a swift, full, and transparent investigation into his death, while urging peaceful demonstrations. The president also emphasized violence is destructive and against the law and has no place in seeking justice.
In the White House press briefing room, this plea for peace tonight.
He's going to continue to call for meaningful reforms. He said that last night, and he said that many times before. And he's going to continue to call for protests to remain peaceful.
A police official describing the officer's actions, which happened during a traffic stop, as heinous, reckless, and inhumane. Family members of Tyre pleading for peace as well.
We understand the outrage that that the community has. As we have said, it is disproportionately, when you see this type of violence, is disproportionately affecting Black and brown communities.
Meanwhile, President Joe Biden has a new chief of staff. Ron Klain, who helped get the infrastructure bill passed, is leaving. Jeff Zients, who led the administration's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, comes on board. Meanwhile, overseas, Somalia. U.S. Special Forces kill a senior Islamic State group leader and 10 other terrorists in a cave. President Biden gave the go-ahead this week. Bilal al-Sudani, a key financial facilitator for the global terrorist organization, among the dead terrorists. And in Europe, on International Holocaust Remembrance Day, Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff, the husband of Vice President Kamala Harris, visiting the site of the former Nazi concentration camp Auschwitz-Birkenau in Poland as part of commemorations for the 78th anniversary of the liberation of the camp. In all, some 1.1 million people were killed at the vast complex before it was liberated by Soviet troops on January 27, 1945.
Now tonight, President Biden heads to Camp David. Of course, he'll be briefed on the situation in Memphis. Again, he is calling for peaceful demonstrations. Then next week, he heads to Baltimore and New York City to tout his infrastructure law and how it's paying for things like improving old tunnels. And today, the GOP tweeted Joe Biden and the Democrats' reckless spending needs to be reined in at the White House. Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
A disturbing new video shows the moment Paul Pelosi was violently attacked by a man holding a hammer. The police body cam shows suspect David DePape lunge toward the husband of former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Paul Pelosi suffered a skull fracture and other serious injuries. The suspect is being held in jail without bail. The church worker in Spain killed in a possible terror attack earlier this week was laid to rest today in front of family and friends. The 60-year-old was killed as part of a rampage Wednesday in southern Spain. Earlier, in a different church, the suspect attacked a Catholic priest. One man is in custody. The priest remains in stable condition. 3 other people were also injured. Our residents in the capital city of Kinshasa are preparing for the Holy Father's visit to the Democratic Republic of Congo next week in the wake of Wednesday's bomb attack in eastern Congo.
This trip of the Holy Father is also a way to turn on the spotlight on the situation in Congo, to say to the world that we cannot somehow forget, we cannot neglect that there is an ongoing humanitarian drama which is going on here.
The Catholic Church has played a leading role in the Congo's politics, sometimes mediating in revolving conflicts. Many are hoping the Pope's visit will help the country find peace. The Vatican Secretary of State weighs in on diplomacy and the war in Ukraine. It happened at an event for Catholic journalists in Lourdes honoring St. Francis de Sales, the patron saint of journalists. EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief Andreas Tannhauser has more in this exclusive interview with Cardinal Pietro Parolin.
We're here in Lourdes inside the sacristy of the Basilica. With me is His Eminence Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Secretary of State of the Vatican, who addressed also the journalists who came together here for a pilgrimage over those days. Yesterday you spoke about peace and diplomacy. Can you tell us a little bit more how this can actually be achieved? How can peace be achieved also through diplomacy and your strategy there?
Yes, thank you. I greet all of you. And it was a good occasion just to talk and to reflect on that issue, especially in our days when we are seeing a lot of conflicts everywhere, starting from the war in Ukraine, which is very object of great concern for everybody. I think that diplomacy is a way just to help to promote and enhance peace in our day. You know that the definition, the traditional definition of diplomacy is another way. Instead of making war, we are trying just to solve our problem peacefully. And this is the aim of the diplomacy, especially the diplomacy of the Holy See. The diplomacy, it has at its aim this principle and main objective just to achieve peace in the world. That was since the beginning. I think that the diplomacy of the Holy See started just to help to achieve peace in the world, and especially in our days. And then, of course, we use the means of the diplomacy, then is the dialogue, especially the dialogue, and all the other means, the good offices, the mediation, the facilitation, just to achieve this aim. The first condition is the goodwill of the parties. If they are really interested to solve the problem in a peaceful way. But we are there as we did in this occasion to offer our service just in favor of peace and a peaceful solution of the issue.
And what role could Catholic journalists or journalists in general also play in that process?
Oh, I think that because we can fight not only with bomb, but we can fight also with words, with writings. And then I think that the journalists have a very important role to play, just to help to create an atmosphere of peace, of understanding, of reconciliation among people. Really, we have to disarm, I think, first of all, our mind and our speech. That is the first condition, just to disarm also, let's say, to disarm the world, to keep it free from harm. Then I think in that sense the journalists have a great work to do and a great impact to give to the situation.
And real quickly, what is your message to the journalists here in Lourdes?
My message is really because, of course, they are Catholic journalists, no? According to what I know. So I was said, just to put their work at the service of the truth, and also to help peace and reconciliation, but also to help people to understand really what is the Church. I think that is a special point that I would like to stress. The journalist, the Catholic journalist, should help the general public opinion to know exactly what is the Church, what the Church is doing, and what contribution is given to humanity.
Your Eminence, thank you so much.
Thank you.
In Lourdes, Andreas Tonhauser, EWTN News Nightly.
And we have a lot more still to come here on EWTN News Nightly, including concern in California. Democrat Governor Gavin Newsom signs a measure to expand access to gender reassignment surgeries, and a closer look at a growing movement among Catholic and private schools. Thanks for staying with us. This month, California officially became a state of refuge for transgender children. In a law signed by Governor Gavin Newsom, children and their families who are fleeing states where gender surgeries are banned are now protected from prosecution. Meantime, Virginia Democrats are pushing a bill that will allow minors access to medical procedures without parental consent. And joining us now in our studio is the former head of the American College of Pediatricians, Dr. Quentin Van Meter, and current director of the American College of Pediatricians, Dr. Jill Simons. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here.
Dr. Van Meter, I want to start off with you. Your reaction to these headlines coming out of California, and, you know, are you surprised by all of this?
I'm not surprised because it's California, where Governor Newsom tends to go off on the deep end often. But the idea that a child can come from a state where perhaps the laws in the state have been designed to protect them from the harms that we knew, those of us on the scientific evidence of medicine know happen to these children. And so the family is torn apart. One parent takes their child undercover to California. The other parent is left back in their home state, helpless and unable to be part of the family. It rips the family asunder.
Yeah, it's so dangerous on so many levels. I'm curious, why do you think there's such a push for this gender-affirming care here in the United States when other countries like Sweden are kind of pulling back from it?
Well, the European countries you mentioned are essentially 10 years ahead of us in terms of data. They've collected the data and they've analyzed it critically and realized there was no benefit whatsoever and some greater potential harm in doing these kinds of affirmation, or if you so-called affirmation techniques on these children. And so they have ceased all those activities and said the main thing that needs to happen is the counseling. Until the age of consent, there should be no intervention which allows that child to assume the persona of the opposite sex.
So, Dr. Simons, I'm going to ask you, I'm not a doctor, so there's some things obviously I don't understand, but why wouldn't we follow Sweden's lead on this?
It's a good question, and that's an issue that the American College of Pediatricians is raising to let's pause, let's look at the science, let's look at the medical facts, and see what really is the best for these children.
Yeah, you think you would sort of play it safe and follow, the country that was sort of the lead on that. Dr. Van Meter, I want to go back to you now. Can you talk to us, because you're an endocrinologist, can you talk to us about the medical and the psychological repercussions of some of these therapies on young people? How will it affect them?
Well, even the social aspect of just giving the child a new name and a new persona, it immediately tears the child's fabric of life apart. And it's hard to put that back together. They call that fully reversible, but the child is never seen the same by their peers, by their parents, by the extended family members. And then you go into the medical issues and block puberty and use the wrong sex hormones in large amounts to sort of create a physical appearance of the opposite sex. And there are incredibly profound, deeply bothersome and well documented in scientific literature consequences of blocking puberty and all of the things that with the cross-sex hormones do. The surgery is the end point where they are essentially completely sterilized. And you cannot expect an adolescent child to understand that there will be no sexual function, that they will not be able to procreate as a result of a decision they made when they were 13 or 14. The breasts are cut off. This is a mom who will maybe someday turn around and want to be that mom who wants to breastfeed and can't do it. It's a tragedy.
It really isn't. And having children, many of us know that children change their minds all the time. And it seems I've seen this dramatic spike in children who are gender dysphoric or saying that they're transgender, a lot of them girls. What do you think is leading to this, Dr. Simons?
I think the social contagion aspect of it, teenage girls in particular want to fit in with their friends, and we talked about this just before we started, that puberty is a time of lots of changes and sometimes being unhappy with those changes. And so now, instead of normalizing that as just part of growing up and accepting that and learning to appreciate your body, it's discussed as well, maybe you're transgender, or giving it another name. And so it's a shift in how we're treating normal puberty.
And what about doctors, Catholic doctors in particular? They're under a lot of pressure right now and going against their conscious rights when it comes to these type of procedures or gender-affirming care. What can they do? Can you kind of talk about that push and pull?
Sure, and that's why the American College of Pediatricians is here as a place for pediatricians to come as an alternative to the other medical organizations and be able to push back against this and practice what we really think is best for these children. So our office receives multiple calls and contacts a week from pediatricians as well as from parents reaching out to us, looking for resources as to what they can do to help these children.
Yeah, it's very concerning, and I wish we had more time, but thank you both so much for being here today to talk about this very important subject. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Up next on EWTN News Nightly, putting the class in classics. Learn more about the new trend for Catholic and private schools. Welcome back. It is a movement growing by leaps and bounds in private and Catholic schools, the return to classical education. The curriculum focuses on building young minds to pursue truth with a focus on the fine arts, classical literature, and the history of civilization. In an age where test scores are plummeting and woke agendas permeate schools, is the classical route the answer? Joining us tonight to discuss is Jeremy Tate, founder and CEO of the Classical Learning Test. Jeremy, thank you for being with us. We appreciate it. For a long time, classical education was really the cornerstone of Catholic and Christian schools. Why was it replaced, and what was it replaced with?
Absolutely. The whole history of the church, really the church preserved the classics and passed down this generation, this body of knowledge from one generation to the next. And then really beginning in the 20th century, we embraced a new kind of utilitarian progressive education. And essentially the idea was that if students are not going to use it, they shouldn't have to learn it. But unfortunately, that eliminates things like poetry, philosophy, they would even say religion. So it is really a completely different kind of education, which I would call a secular progressive model that really took the place of classical, which really was the tradition of the church for centuries and centuries.
Yeah, and even in some schools, they took away cursive handwriting. What has happened in the wake of the overall departure from the classical model? And could this be why we're seeing the rise of concepts like critical race theory?
Absolutely. And Tracy, fundamentally what we're talking about is a change in what we call the telos, or the goal, or the end of education itself. For the church, it has always been about the cultivation of virtue, the cultivation of a love for Jesus Christ, right? And the goal has shifted to something kind of like college and career readiness. It's almost vague what exactly the goal is right now, but it's certainly not the cultivation of virtue or the formation of the whole person in the way that has always been the goal or the end of education as the Catholic Church has understood it. So the consequences of this, we're seeing this everywhere. But the good news is that there is absolutely an incredible renaissance. There is a revival happening right now. New schools starting all over the place. My own kiddos go to Divine Mercy Academy. A fighter pilot started this school. It's been covered on EWTN already at least a couple times, I believe. This school, the enrollment is blowing up. These kids are going to daily mass. They say the rosary every day. This is what parents are looking for. And the difference, you see the difference in the lives of these young people. Qualitatively, maturity, carrying themselves with eloquence and character. The future is bright, I believe.
Yeah, and you say it, I'm hearing it right here, classical education really seems to be the answer, providing students and obviously parents with a lot there, and seems to be really getting them ready for life in general. I want to pivot here for a moment to the topic of standardized testing. On one hand, It seems like a really good idea, right? But there seems to be a little bit more to that. Talk to us about that.
And Tracy, your timing here is perfect, and I'm hoping EWTN can help us break this story. But right now, NWEA Maps, which is a standardized testing company that is utilized by, unfortunately, hundreds of Catholic schools, in some ways has just kind of been caught pushing a very, very radical kind of fringe element of a LGBTQ plus agenda, recommending the drag queen's dress goes swish, 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 for kindergartners, for pre-K, for 5-year-olds, right? This is the standardized testing company that's being used, again, by hundreds of Catholic schools. So typically standardized testing, we think of it as something almost that's so boring, it's just something you've got to do. But really, standardized testing drives curriculum. It conveys to students and schools what's important and what isn't important. Just about 7 years ago, we launched an alternative to the SAT and ACT. As you may know, the College Board is arguably the most powerful education entity in America. And they're pushing a lot of this ideology through testing in this way that nobody would assume. Our position at CLT is that if the tests drive curriculum, students ought to be reading St. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, Flannery O'Connor, Catherine of Siena. They should be reading C.S. Lewis from the great tradition of the Church and the West. So that's what we're doing here at CLT.
Well, Jeremy, thank you for bringing all this up. Thank you for talking to us about it and bringing all this to light. We appreciate it. Hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you, Tracy.
And we thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sable. Good night, and God bless.